Thank you, everybody, for coming into our first online Zoom class on Liechtenauer Zettel. How's everybody doing?
Pretty good.
Everyone's good? Okay. So, as I was explaining kind of in the pre-class here, what we're going to do is we're going to start off by reading Liechtenauer's original verse, section by section, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion amongst each other about what the material is saying, what it's going over. If you want to share any experience of, oh, I remember that technique. We did that in class back in September. I used that in sparring against Jack when he was being a jerk or something. What, share stories, share your thoughts, share your comments about this. And then after we look at Liechtenauer's verse itself, we're going to look at the Peter von Danzig commentaries about that section. So we'll look at the original text, the original founder of our art, and then look at some of the work and some of the commentaries by the masters that came along after him. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion here. For references, I put the link of von Danzig on Liechtenauer. I also have the Sigmund Ringek Liechtenauer page loaded up in case we want to make references to that and see how some of the different masters compare. They're from about the same time period. But I'm going to be reading mostly from In St. George's Name, Christian's book. It's got a very nice translation, and the photography is excellent in it. The photography is not that great. I did the photography for this, but I did not have a good camera. And it's a very deep depth of field. I didn't like that. I want a nice, shallow, dramatic depth of field. But we're our own worst critic. Okay, so I'm going to start off by reading a little introduction here. Actually, I should say before this. So I refer to this as the Peter von Danzig fetch book or von Danzig. I want to make the point of saying that von Danzig was a master in our system, and he is credited with this text we're reading is out of a larger source, and he's credited as the author of the final section. He's not explicitly credited as the author for these commentaries, but he's at least credited somewhere in the manuscript, so therefore it's the only name we really have. Otherwise, it's calling it Codex 44A8 every time, and I think von Danzig just sounds better. In terms of von Danzig himself, I thought it'd be interesting to also say we're not looking at the text in particular, but one of my personal favorites is the Paulus Cal Fesch book, which is where this illustration comes from.
Oh no, that's your favorite.
Yes, we're familiar with this one. But for those not familiar with this, these are the the three qualities of a skilled fencer. And the translation is, I have the eyes of the falcon so that I will not be fooled. And then on his heart, we see, I have the heart of a lion so that I strive forward. And then on the bottom, if you notice, he has these hooved feet. And it says, I have the feet of the hind or deer, so I leap 2 and 4, or spring 2 and 4. Cool. So that is just some of the qualities of a good fighter. Now, where's my other picture go? I wanted to load this. So, oops, I did the wrong way. Hold on 1 second. That's the one I'm looking for. Share. So this is a picture from this manuscript that we're reading the translation from. And supposedly, we're not 100% sure, but this is, we imagine that this is actually supposed to be an illustration of Master Liechtenauer himself. And he's dressed in the kind of clothing that someone from his time period and region would be wearing. He's got that nice big beard, so he clearly looks like an old man. And he's holding one of the early designs of a Federspeer, the training sword, and he has a stick in his hand, and he's pointing at a longsword and a messer mounted on the wall. So that's just a illustration of from the beginning of this manuscript about Liechtenauer's verse with a little picture from Liechtenauer himself.
Now,
So,
this one quick question: what century
Mhm.
do they think this is? Did he live around?
Liechtenauer himself or the von Danzig that we're reading?
Both.
Liechtenauer is a most likely something like a 14th or early 15th century. We don't have a lot of biographical information about him specifically, but we know he was dead at a certain point, and that's about it. Actually, very good question, Jack. This brings up, well, the manuscript we're reading specifically is dated to about 1452. But if we look at share screen, where is this one on here? The Paul's Cowfesh book, which that illustration of the crazy Birdman comes from. I'm just pulling up the Liechtenauer site on it. In the beginning of Paul's Cal, he actually lists off, here begins the Our Liechtenauer that's created with the fellowship and applied to the knightly weapons. May God have mercy on him. And then he lists off Masters Liechtenauer, Wildigen von Glatz, Peter von Danzig, Hans Spindler, Lamprecht, Seidenfelder, Andre Lignitzer, for those that come to class and have done Sword and Buckler with us. That's the master that wrote the Sword and Buckler. Jacob Lignitzer, his brother, Sigmund Ringeck, Hartmann von Nuremberg, Martin Hutzfeld, who we have manuscripts of. There's several masters that are listed here. Ott the Jew, who is the wrestler up to the lords of Austria. So this gives some names to some of the masters that were known to be explicitly part of the system, and as a result, most likely knew Paul's Cal. So the people listed here were known by Cal. So if they lived around the same time period and they knew him, we kind of make the assumption that they all knew each other, especially since Paul's Cal makes reference to the Society or Fellowship of Liechtenauer, which is this Gesellschaft term in German, which from some linguists have said that it means like not just fellowship, but like almost like war band kind of thing. So there's some speculation that some of these sword masters might have actually served together in the Hussar rebellions, because it would have been around the same time period in the same part of Europe. So they might have actually all known each other, at least in some sense, and that's why we have a lot of these manuscripts that are extremely similar, that are quoting each other and things, which is kind of what some of this online class is going to look at. So now that I've done bored you about all, and I dropped my Bluetooth on the floor, I'm sorry. That might have been loud and obnoxious. There we go. Okay. So now that we're getting into this, I will start with the reading of Liechtenauer's verse here, and then we'll look at the commentaries. So there's a little introduction that was written into this manuscript first that begins, here begins the epitome on the knightly art of combat that was composed and created by Johannes Liechtenauer, who was a great master of the art. God have mercy on him. First with the longsword, then with the lance and sword on horseback, and then with the half-sword in armored combat. Because the art belongs to princes and lords, knights and squires, and they should know and learn this art, he has written of this art hidden and in secret words, so that not everyone will grasp and understand it, as you will find described below. And he has done this on account of frivolous fight masters who mistake the art as trivial, so that such masters will not make his art common or open with people who do not hold the art in respect as it is due. So this little paragraph here tells us that the reason that we have this mnemonic poem verse that tells us about the fighting arts is because the original founding master wanted to keep it all secret. Then we have a bunch of his a-hole students and later masters that tell us exactly what the poem meant in the first place. So he had intent of not letting anybody know, and then, you know, for the next 300 years, everyone said, hey, this is totally what he was telling you. So whatever we do, he's been long betrayed. So now moving on to the next section here. This is the prologue. Young knight, learn to love God and revere women. Thus your honor will grow. Practice knighthood and learn the art that dignifies you and brings you honor in war. Be a good grappler in wrestling. Lance, spear, sword, and messer handle manfully, and foil them in your opponent's hand. Strike in and hasten forth. Rush to, let it hit or go by. Thus those with wisdom, the ones who are revered, will envy him. This you should grasp. All art has length and measure. So for all of you that have been doing training with us, what do you get out of that? What do you recognize? What are your feelings and thoughts about that?
It reminds me of chivalry without the bad parts of chivalry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think
there's the two sides of chivalry. There's the idealized what chivalry should be, and then what chivalry was used for. Yeah.
Right.
There's some references here to things I like to point out is I know a lot of HEMA practitioners like to look at just the longsword. And I know our founding curriculum, our base curriculum for a lot of new students really focuses on that. But he makes a point right here in the first 10 lines of all the teachings to say, learn to wrestle, learn to use the lance, learn to use the spear, use the sword. And he says messer here. There's some speculation that he actually means dagger because you're going from bigger weapon to smaller weapon. But that might be an issue because in German, it's Ringes Gus Fesser, Gleifen Speer, Schwert und Messer. So Fesser and Messer rhyme. If he wrote, you know, Gleifen Speer, Schwert und Degen, it would ruin the rhyme. So anyway, the right beginning of the text here, he's telling us that it's important to learn all the different weapons, not just one.
Yeah.
And I think that I try to get you guys all to do that too. You all work on wrestling periodically, and we do dagger every once in a while, and then of course we do all of our stuff with longsword. Hell, maybe when this is all over and we're back to regular class, we'll mess around with spear.
That'd be awesome.
I think
So-
the length and measure part is particularly important because I think one thing that is probably more important than just learning how to cut well is learning when you're in proper distance and timing.
Yeah.
Length would be distance. Measure, which I've read in more contemporary sources, is like, oh yeah, measure is length. But maybe in this instance, it's more of a musical term. Maybe it's more about timing.
Beats, maybe?
Beats, exactly.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
4 time, 3/4 time, 5/4. Hey, hell, Sun Tzu said, "Never give a sword to a man who can't dance."
Exactly.
This is true.
So,
But we give Jack one anyway.
I do
Well,
have to
don't-
admit, I can't dance though, but I can handle a sword pretty good.
I'm still learning how to dance. Relearning anyway.
It's fun. I did ballroom dance for a while. It was a good time.
Nice.
ah,
Dance, you could do dressage.
gosh, yeah,
That counts.
there's a rhythm to that. I've seen my mom do it.
Okay, let's see. How do I want to talk about? Oh, okay. So I'll read through the next section in the poem first, because that's the way it's broken up in the later part. Sorry. Okay, so this is a general teaching of the longsword. So that first part was just a little prologue about going into this is something that you should study as a noble person because it brings you honor, blah, blah, blah. Now we're getting into the general teachings of the longsword. Page 96 of In St. George's Name, if you have it. If you want to behold the art, see that you go on the left and strike with the right, and left to right is how you strongly want to fight. He who follows the strokes should rejoice little in his art. Strike close whatever you will, no changer will come into your shield. To the head, to the body, but do not shun the tag hits. Fight with the entire body. What you powerfully want to do. Listen to what is wrong. Do not fight above on the left if you are right-handed. And if you are left-handed, on the right, you will limp as well. Before and after, these two things are all skill a wellspring. Weak and strong, always remember the word instantly. So you may learn to work and defend with skill. If you are easily intimidated, no fencing should you learn. Learn the 5-stroke from the right side against the opposition. Then we promise that your arts will be rewarded.
May I just make a comment that
Yes.
how he said that how you're left if you're left-handed on the right, then you're if you are left-handed on the right, you limp as well. I think that if you would not be really limp because you're basically have the same equal of power behind the sword as everyone else. If you're fighting someone with a different I don't know how to put it, but yeah.
If you're right-handed left-handed person.
Yeah, basically.
It's difficult interpretation for sure. It's a little bit hard to work around for a bit.
Yeah. I believe that the text there is saying is it's a matter of if you are right-handed, you should be fighting essentially from right vom Tag because you get this power here. But if I'm right-handed and I try to fight this way, I'm awkward and I don't have the strength as I do at least from this side. If I'm left-handed, I step with the left and cut to the right. From here, I have a little less reach. I have a little less strength. So, like we do with a lot of our basic drills when we're starting in our guard vom Tag, we're starting with our left foot leading and we're cutting in behind our sword with our right foot. And on the occasions when we're on our left side, whether we're in some drill where we're doing vom Tag on the left or Nebenhut Flug, we're stepping in with the left on the using our left side. I'm bad with the left-right thing. I got to remember.
I am too. Trust me.
Yeah.
I was gonna say what I get out of that. I agree with what you're saying, Chris. And what I get out of that is if you're fighting a left-handed person, don't go to the left-hand side because you'll be at a disadvantage while they'll be in there strong, and vice versa. If you're right-handed,
But maybe it's encouragement for us to practice left-handed.
Be ambidextrous.
Yeah,
I think it is important. Yeah,
it is.
Once you understand the basics, I think it's good to be able to be ambidextrous.
Because you never know who you're gonna you never know who you're gonna fight if you ever start competing.
Yeah.
Kelly helps with that.
Oh yeah, and whenever I try to do some of those types of arts, I always have trouble with my left hand because I'm used to having two hands on one weapon, or if I have anything in my left hand, it's going to be a small shield or something like that, not usually another paired weapon. So that's something I've always struggled with. I'm not coordinated enough for two hands.
Unless you're like me and are left-handed, but fight with your right.
Yeah, but look how terribly you fight with your right.
Hey now, Ringo Starr is a left-handed guy who plays a right-handed kid.
Thanks for that.
I did not know that.
The more you
the rare
know.
left-handed
That's because you have a horrible musical taste, Valley.
Oof, this is
Damn.
But I do agree with him of how where he says that if you're easily intimidated that you shouldn't fence. I agree with that because if you're intimidated about getting hit, then you should not be holding a sword at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's scary. It sucks getting cut.
Oh yeah, but I think part of that is it's also a matter of he right around that same time. Where is it? Oh, that's not right there. Earlier in that same part of the text, he says, "He who follows the stroke should rejoice little in his art." You know, we've talked about the concept of seizing the initiative, making that first attack. The idea here of following the stroke should rejoice little. In other words, you should not be waiting for your opponent to do something and reacting to them, following them. You should be the one taking that initiative, taking that control, and making the first attack. They are responding to you.
That's what I do all the time, and I can't get myself out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, you wait until somebody else does something.
Yeah, that's why I've been trying to practice as much as I can, so I can, when we go back to sparring, I'm ready and I'm on my A game basically.
Yeah. Now I will say that I think this is also a the first line of this being young knight learn. I think this is how a young man should fight. The older I get, the more I realize that it's so much easier with 20 years experience to let all of you come lunging in and do all the hard work to close distance on me, and then I just simply counter. That's not the beginning of a tech. That's later on. That's advanced tactics and being old and tired and
Old age and
let's
treachery.
see. Yes, old age and treachery.
Old man.
What was the else in here? Oh, before and after these two things are to all skills a wellspring. That's another one that I think is significant here. Before and after. Does anyone remember what that is in German? We've used the term in class a few times.
Before and after? Oh, God.
When it was
Knox was one of them, right?
Knox?
Or
Indes,
Close, not. Yeah.
or was that a in between or something?
Yep. Yeah, you're all pretty close. Indes is that instantly or during, and then vor is before,
Yeah.
and knock is
After.
after. Oh, yep. There's Kyle saying it in chat there.
Nice.
Vor and knock are the before and after.
That's
So,
actually later in
these are.
Sorry. You get there. I was just saying
Yeah,
that
there's
it's before, it's in the text later as we read on.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's that's a real basic concept that he's introducing in this prologue here. That as we go through, we'll learn more and more about. But the terms vor and nach themselves, we see referenced several times in other techniques. Even like nachreisen, the following after is one of the basic techniques and things. Okay, so that is the beginning of that section. Let me turn my page to, where's my bookmark? Oh, I went past it. There it is. Okay, so now let's look at what Master von Danzig, or whoever, but we're calling him Master von Danzig for now, what he says about this. So one of the first things we were talking about, if you want to behold the art, see that you go with the left and strike with the right, and left to right is how you strongly want to fight. Gloss. Note, this is the first skill of the longsword, that before all things you should learn how to strike correctly if you should wish to fight strongly. And understand this thus. When you stand with your left leg forward and strike from your right side, if you do not follow the stroke with a step forward of your right foot, then the strike is false and incorrect. When your right side stays behind, thus the strike too short and cannot have its correct path to the other side before and above the left foot. Or if you stand with your right foot forward and strike from the left, again, if you do not follow the stroke with the left foot, then the strike is also false. Therefore, remember, when you strike from the right side, that you should always follow the blow with the right foot. The same do likewise when you strike from the left side. Thus, your body will put itself correctly in balance, and the strokes will be delivered long and straight. So, basic footwork drill. The concept of our first solo drill that we do at the beginning of every class, Oberhau, Unterhau, is using this concept when we are when we are starting with our left foot leading, and we are cutting from our right side. We are stepping behind our cut with our our right foot, sorry, which gives our body strength behind our blow. And then the same thing in the case of that specific drill, when we're on our left side, we are striking up from below and from the left and stepping in with the left foot to get that nice strong body turn in there. So Von Danzig is telling us that stepping with our cuts is important to give them proper strength. If we're not stepping, if we're just cutting without stepping, then how did he phrase it? We are false and incorrect or something? Yeah, false and incorrect. So every once in a while you hear people make reference to a false cut, and that's just what that is. That is, by some of these old manuscripts, the idea of cutting without a step.
How'd that do cutting competitions?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what everyone comments about cutting competitions. It's always false cuts.
Sorry about that. My internet was acting up.
Cool.
It happens.
Internet acting up? Huh.
Okay. So any comments on that, or we should move on?
All good.
What part were we just talking about?
The very beginning, talking about stepping with our cut.
Okay. But I just want to also make one more comment before we move on. I have been getting really good about that with practicing a lot and everything with the stepping after the sword and everything.
Oh yeah. That's something that we've drilled into you many times, Jack.
Oh, yeah,
definitely getting better. And Ronan, did you have something to say? I think you started to put your hands up.
I was just saying all good.
Oh, okay.
No worries.
The delay in everyone's audio and the delay in everyone's video I don't want to cut anybody off, so I'm doing my best.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, so let's look at the next little section here. We're on page 111 of the in St. George's Name, if anyone's curious, and follow along in the hard copy for those that have it. This is the text and gloss of another lesson. He who follows the stroke should rejoice little in his art. So that's Liechtenauer's, a line from Liechtenauer's Zettel. Gloss. This means that when you come to him in the Zufechten, that range where you can't quite hit each other, but you're approaching that point, then you should not stand still and watch for his stroke, nor wait for what he will execute against. Know that all combatants who watch and wait for another stroke do nothing but parry, and should not much rejoice in their skill, for it is worthless, and they will be struck because of it. He's very critical of this.
I was going to say, it's pretty intense.
Yeah.
You will die, or else.
So we can very confidently say that Von Danzig is stressing the idea of seizing that initiative yourself, correct?
Yes. That if you stand still, you're gonna die. I guess.
Yeah.
Fight on your terms.
Yeah. Fight or die.
But it is true. I mean, tactically, what he's saying is, yes, actually what Kyle just put in chat there, that you'll wind up in the knock. Von Danzig tells us here, all who watch and wait for another strokes do nothing but parry. So if someone else is making that initial attack against you, regardless of what that attack is, you cannot attack them without first addressing their attack at you. So now, if Jack throws that overhow at me, I can't simply throw an overhow too, because then I hit him, he hits me. That's not good fencing. That's not going to be a good plan. But if Jack throws the overhow at me and I parry, I go to Ox, I go to Flug, I go to just a basic, a simple or hanging parry, any of these, then I don't die. But now Jack has the opportunity to follow on with the second attack because my action was just countering hit. Of course, then we go into the master cuts, which are sort of antithesis to this, of defending against an incoming blow while making an attack. But that's what makes them master cuts. That's what we're going to be looking at over the next couple weeks. Any other commentary on the He Who Follows the Strokes bit?
Pretty self-explanatory from my perspective and experience. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty straightforward. A lot of the early text in this book is pretty straightforward, really boilerplate stuff. Oh, where did the chat go on this? I'd liken the master cuts to Bruce Lee's punch within a punch. Oh, yeah, very good call. Oh, Christopher says, what happens if you both intend to seize the vor? Well, that honestly happens a lot more. Ideally, you're the one taking the control, but in my experiences anyway, when basically both people have responded instantaneously at the exact same time in that awkward way, one person usually ends up converting their, say, overpower into their attack to a defense mid-action, or they get hit. That also happens. If you look at sparring videos, it's not womp womp. Yeah. But if I, let's say, if I'm sparring with Luke and we both cut at the same time, the angle of the trajectory of my cut is going to change from hitting him to shifting over to a defense. I might be able to hit him too, maybe, or use on the master cuts like a Zornhau, or as I come in, go, oh, nope, I'm going to switch to a Zverch or something to defend. But that's going to be an indes, a during action, not responding essentially in the vor or not, but during that motion going, oh no, we're going to change up. Without knocking my stuff over. Okay, so we'll move on to the next section. Everyone good?
Yeah.
I can't see.
Okay.
Keep responding visually.
This is the text and gloss of another lesson. If you strike close to him, no changer will come to your shield. To the head, to the body, do not shun the tag hit. Fight with the entire body what you powerfully want to do. Gloss. This means that when you come to him in the Zufechten, the pre-fight, use the entire strength of your body for whatever you intend to execute, and strike while approaching to his head or body, keeping your point before his face or chest. This way, he cannot change through before your point. If he parries with strength and directs the point from you out towards the side, then give him the tag hit on the arm. Or if he goes high with his arms in parrying, then strike him with a free stroke below to the body and step quickly backwards with it. Thus he is struck before he knows it. So one thing I want to point out here is the changer, I believe he's using the word. Let me look at this. I want to make sure that I'm not saying this wrong. Changer. Oh, this is using the term Wechsel. So when he's using the word here, I had to look at the German. I want to make sure, but he's using the term the Wechsel, the change, which for those of you that have done some of, say, I think it shows up in the Messer material, but also shows up in the sword and buckler content in Lignitzer's third play with the sword and buckler, third or fourth. He shows the changer, which is that idea of striking in. There's my sword. Striking in and then maybe dropping the point underneath and striking up with maybe the back edge. Or it's basically that idea of sort of feinting with one attack, but coming in with something else. So striking, what he's saying here about that is striking strongly with the body, he's not going to be able to do some of those simple, countering a untrained fighter kind of tricky moves. If you're stepping out to the side and striking with power, you're cutting off the line and you're not worried about him changing through underneath or anything like that. You have that little bit of safety to it.
So he's basically
what he talks about here too is
So he's basically saying to take the center line before he does?
Yes. Well, he's saying specifically that by taking the center line, he has to address you. You have the tactical advantage by stepping in with the body and the strength of the body and committing, because you will have the advantage once you've entered into the Krieg, the war, that you've entered into to hit each other. But one of the things here, he says, do not shun the tag hits. I know we've talked about that is when we're doing sparring, it's kind of a cheap shot when your opponent just, Luke just leaves his hands floating out there in the middle of the range while we're in the middle of a play, and you just go, back. We're told right here in the beginning of the text, that's a legitimate technique. It's not what you always want to do. And you notice when he talks about, when Von Danzig is referring to the tag hits, he's not talking about waiting until someone is closing into range and just doing that false cut without a step tagging, but he's referring to it being when you've stepped in from the Zufechten and you're in range with your opponent or partner, and they raise their hands or they stop or whatever, then feel free to do it. So it's not an opening action to just hand snipe, but it's we've already closed in and we're in range of each other. If you see that opportunity, take it. Don't go seeking it, but if you see it come up and it's just presenting itself, if Jack is sitting there with his hands out in front of him, just hit his hands. It's an easy way. Easy way to end the fight.
I do that a lot too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On both sides. You take a lot of hands, Jack, and you've gotten hit on the hands quite a few times too. So
Yeah.
that goes both ways.
One of my guildmates was like that too. Is that one tournament he was like this big, really big guy, and I had to fight him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the type of guy. He's done it twice now in tournaments, where he's in the middle of the tournament, he's taken off his gloves and just fought with bare hands, holding a sword and whatnot. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? And sure enough, who's the one to patch him up the time that I'm fighting him? Me. I'm the one patching him up after the show, after like I'm done fighting him, because he doesn't get the idea that you have to wear gloves to protect your damn hands.
Yeah, there's definitely some. I mean, there is a balance between protection and dexterity. The more protective the equipment on the hands, the less dexterous you're going to be. It's going to be harder to manipulate the weapon. It's going to be harder to grapple, all these things. But if you want to sacrifice and go for something where you have that little bit more dexterity, yeah, then you run the risk of getting hit. Yeah. That's why you look at some of the 15th century, like high Gothic, really high quality gauntlets and things. They're extremely dexterous, but those were the Lamborghinis or Ferraris of chivalry. Those weren't the common man's sort of things. Those were extremely high end. Yeah, I noticed that you said somebody made the point of saying the Zek, which Von Danzig uses the term Zek as well here in tag. Give him the tag hit or Zek on the arm. Yep, yeah, he uses it. There's a lot of similarities between Ringek and Von Danzig, which is why there's, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, about that Society of Liechtenauer that Paul's Cal references. Ringek and Von Danzig were both listed as two masters of Liechtenauer. So it really does make sense that a lot of their terminologies and a lot of their commentaries parallel each other. There are differences, of course, but there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. This is actually, I mean, quick side note, one of the things that separates up some of the stuff from, say, what Jason does. It's the upside and downside of Liechtenauer versus Fiore. Fiore is a very concise, here's the text, this is what you do, here's some pictures, here's some literature, go do it. There's less variable in a certain way when it comes to Fiore. In Liechtenauer, we have a bunch of different masters that tell us mostly the same things, but occasionally slightly different things, which is good and bad. It means we can compare notes on things a lot more, but every once in a while, Fiore says this, so everyone that does Fiore does this. Ringek says maybe this variant, but then Talhofer or Von Danzig or Lekushner says this. So it's like, well, which one do we want to go with? So you end up with a lot more material, but there's a lot more to go over that way. It's just interesting comparisons, these two. And as I say that, I'm going to take a sip of my my Fiore wine here. Thank you, Jason.
Nice.
Prost. May I for a moment?
Yes.
Jump in? So you're right. I mean, I can't dispute what you just said. I think what's the benefit and the bane, and I don't want to derail what this session is supposed to be about. Okay, so I'll
yes,
keep.
Yes.
He's like, you're right. The benefit and the bane of Fiore is, as a Fiorist, primarily a Fiorist who studies under Chris, who studies under Christian, who the Liechtenauer system is, as a Fiorist, look, we have 3 texts which are good. We have another text which is mediocre, and it says what it says, but there's stuff left out of it, right? Where I think Fiore fails us a little bit. If anybody ever quotes me on that, I swear to fucking God, I'll kill you. Is, we in the context of the language of the exiles, the group I belong to, is there's this discussion of what we call master battle. The idea of the manuscript describes everything that you do once you come to cross. Okay, once you come to Incorsata, once you come to the bind, and you do things. But Fiore clearly has a concept of what happens before that, and he doesn't explain that. And I think, and again, you may never quote me on this, the Zettel does a bit better service for that. So hence why I listen. And as Fiore said in the preface, Fiore traveled far and trained with many masters, both German and Italian. So I shut the fuck up occasionally and listen.
Yeah, if it was good enough for him, it was good enough for any of us for sure. Yeah, we poke fun at Fiore as we've had this rivalry now for how many hundreds of years between our two systems, but it's always been it feels like it's always been in good fun. We tease each other, but we all are brothers and sisters in arms. So
listen, in the modern context, we have so much more in common than everybody else.
Yes. Regardless, we are the weirdos with sword.
Exactly right.
Exactly.
Cheers
on
that. So one of the things that just because you were saying it, I know Jason, you and I have done some of the half sorting stuff, comparing Liechtenauer and Fiore. But just as a quick aside with this, talking about variables and things, when we talk about that position of the double sword grab, where I'm holding my sword in one hand and the point of my opponent's sword in my other hand, and vice versa, where both opponents are just simply holding onto each other's swords. Almost every master, Lignitzer half sword gives a counter to that, where you toss the sword underneath and go into grapple. Paul's Cowl shows that move where you spin and turn through and basically disarm him that way. Talhofer shows that hook over. So it's one thing, but across our different masters, we're shown multiple different options for that, which technically means we have more options, but at the same time, it also means that there's always that chance that Luke is going to grab my point, and I'm going to go for one of those, and I'm going to get confused as to which one I meant to do. I might I'm going to throw it a grapple, but then I start with the hook and went, oh no, that was the wrong step. Uh-oh. So that's the downside of having multiple options. It means there's more room for error.
Yep.
Maybe maybe we have the various options because depending on height difference of the opponent and you yourself as a fighter, maybe it's because Talhofer was, I don't know, like 6.5 feet tall, and Von Danzig was like 4'9". He was the Dio of So it's like, hey, this works for me because I'm a short guy. It may not work for you because you're taller, but just in case, the option is there. Find out what works for you. It is a martial art. It's the martial art doesn't make the fighter makes the art.
Yeah. So it's basically when I spar a lot of you guys because I'm like one of the tallest there.
Yeah. You get the longest arms. For sure.
Which is why you get all the hand hits.
Yes. Because you are in range 4 feet before Connor is. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the smallest guy in the freaking class, too.
Yeah, I think you're bigger than Lightsaber Rob, but Lightsaber Rob's not in the chat right now, so
no.
he gets called. You're the one that gets called.
But he's got more ferocity to him, so at least give him credit for that.
Lightsaber Rob is also very quick too.
Yes.
Yeah, he's just a scary fighter.
Yeah.
Fun, but scary.
Yeah, pro tip, if you're tall, watch your legs.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've learned that one over the years. But I see what you're saying, Connor. I like that where you're saying about different body types for some of these, because I'm a bigger person. For those that don't know me in person, I'm 6'2", and right now like 220, 230 pounds. So certain techniques work for me without much effort, simply because I can overpower, I can overreach. I am a very large, relatively strong person. So some techniques become easier for me than maybe for other people. At the same time, when I'm teaching, I sometimes get to teach someone that is significantly smaller, not just height-wise, but height-wise, strength-wise. I get to work with people that are bigger than me. I get, like we were just saying, Lightsaber Rob. Lightsaber Rob is a foot shorter than me, while simultaneously significantly stronger and faster than me. So it's interesting as an instructor to work with some of these different things and not just see this technique works for me because of this, but I see how it works for other people as well. And I get to diagnose, which is why I love senior students working with other maybe beginner students and looking at some of these things, because there's a lot of perspective you can learn from looking at things from somebody else's point of view. Which sort of ties back to how Jason is watching our lecture and stealing all of our German secrets. So I think that's good. That's pretty good on that section there. Okay, let's.
I can read all that shit. I study with you guys, and you're all fucking welcome to come train with me too. Okay?
Yay!
If there wasn't a travel ban and all this, like once class is going again, I am definitely going to come down and do some training with you.
That's what I was thinking also. I want to make a trip down there one day and train with you too.
I was planning to this spring, but so far spring is almost over, and I'm not allowed to.
I'm just responding. I mean,
Spring is almost
just
over.
Healing
Yeah,
your secrets. I could read the book.
Nice.
Sorry.
Fun that
Please proceed. I apologize.
No. I'm also trying to make sure that I'm paying attention to the chat in here too. So in case someone makes comments, I don't want to accidentally. If you write a comment chat here and I don't respond to it for a few minutes, feel free to just spam that a couple times so it'll pop up on my phone, because I have my cell phone here with the video and Bluetooth for my audio, but then I have my computer over here on the other side that's doing the recording and also giving me some of the text and all this stuff. So technical. If you feel like I'm ignoring you, just buzz me a couple times, and eventually I'll see it over on the other computer here. Okay,
Thank you.
continuing on. This is the text and gloss of another lesson. I love this. Another lesson. The Germans, they're very creative with it. Listen to what is wrong. Do not fight above on the left if you are right-handed, and if you are left-handed on the right, you limp as well. So this is the thing Jack was commenting on before. Let's see what Von Danzig has to say about this. Note, this is a lesson that applies to right and left-hander and is how you should strike so that your opponent does not overwhelm the weight of your sword in the first stroke. And understand this thus. When you come to him in the Zufechten and you are right-handed, strike the first stroke from the left side that is weak, and you cannot hold strongly against him with it if he strikes strongly in at the same time as you. Instead, strike from the right so that you can hold strongly against him and work on the sword as you wish. Likewise, if you are left-handed, do not deliver your first stroke from the right side, for with a left-hander, it is very uncomfortable to fight from the right side. This is the same for a right-hander from the left side. He gets a little repetitive there, but again, the idea being that if we're cutting in for that initial, when we're approaching, most of the time, our most common guard here is our left foot leading, right vom top, because this way we are trying to put the power of our body behind our sword with that step with our right foot that was mentioned earlier. And this way, my sword is between me and my opponent. My body is turned, are aligned square with my opponent. I have good body positioning, my shoulders. I have good strength going all the way from the tip of my sword back to my left rear heel. So this body position on that initial cut is the most important. Now, once that initial cut is made and we have that bind, we might do a snap-in, we might do Zersch, we might do, or a Vinden, Duplier, and all the different moves we can do from there. And those can be done from either side. But the point of this section here is talking about on that initial move in, when we're making that transition from the chin that just out of range to in range, we want to make sure that cut is strong. Because best case scenario, we hit the guy in the face and the fight's over. Worst case scenario, we're in a very strong body position to counter what he is going to follow up with. Make sense?
We talk about that a lot in class about the parts of like the sword, because I know a lot of times we sometimes land on the tip of like near the tip of the sword where we really want to land right in the middle of the sword where it's the strongest, because then we can go from there. When we're doing all the master cuts.
The different leverage of the different parts of the blade. Yep. So I think that part's pretty straightforward. This is the next section is pretty interesting because it talks about the vor and nach. Before and after the vor and nach, these two things are to all skill a wellspring, weak and strong, and the word instantly, indes, always remember. So you can learn with skill to work and defend. If you are easily intimidated, no fencing should you learn. So this is a little bit from Von Danzig about the vor, nach, and indes, which again we've talked about a lot in class, but it's very important stuff. Von Danzig tells us, note, this means that before all things you should really learn and understand these two things. That is the before or vor and the after, nach. And thereafter, the weak and strong of the sword, which Jack was just mentioning, weak and strong of the sword, and the word instantly, indes. For from these come the entire foundation of all the art of combat. Art of combat, I'll make a comment on that later. When you truly comprehend and understand these things, do not forget the word instantly in all the techniques that you employ. Then you will indeed be a good master of the sword and can teach princes and lords so that they may well conduct themselves with true art of the sword in armored combat and in earnest. So my quick little comment here, he makes a point of saying, not for these come the entire foundation of all the art of combat. He's not saying the art of sword fighting. He's saying the art of combat. Because for anyone that has done wrestling with us, we know that vor and knock, the responding before or after, we do that when we do wrestling. We do that when we do dagger. We do that when we do obviously longsword. We do the sword and buckler when we are using poleaxe or spear. This vor and knock and index are happening regardless of what weapon is in your hands. And just as a note, Ott, the wrestling master Ott, makes a big point in part of his text, I believe kind of towards the beginning, if not in the very prologue of his text. He talks about vor and knock being significant for wrestling, and very similar to what Von Danzig is saying, that it is the foundation of all wrestling, it is the foundation of all fighting, is understanding this, reacting, seizing the initiative before or reacting in the after. What is going on in this chat? Nice. Oh, Admiral Akbar, you died so horribly. Still mad at not Abrams. So unceremoniously, the admiral of the rebel fleet for decades, and he's just flushed out of a window randomly without any sort of fanfare. I'm a little sad.
I want to come in on this one. I really feel I have to agree with you. That was a total waste of a really great ending of a long-loved character. It's in my head canon. That's not how it happened.
Yeah.
Wait, where is this from? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Star Wars.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, episode 8.
8, yeah. The one that we ignore.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've
The one
only
that made the Clone Wars look good. Yes, I know. We get derailed. Surprise, we get derailed. I need swords in my
Good cause.
hand more often, too. Don't. Stay on target. Stay on target. Okay.
There's only one true trilogy.
Oh, episode 8 was the oh wow, now I can't remember the name of the movie.
The
The Last Jedi.
Or the Last Jedi.
The Force Awakens is 7, and then yeah, it's the Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker for the latest trilogy.
Whichever has the one where Luke Skywalker milks Lovecraftian horror.
Yeah.
That's Last Jedi. That it makes me sad as a longtime Star Wars fan.
Yeah, it had problems.
Okay. So, any comments about Star Wars and lightsaber fighting in reference to the before and after, the vor and knock? We tie it in a little bit.
Star Wars.
I don't know if it's related, but the lightsaber fight in the last episode, second to last episode of Clone Wars, was so awesome, and probably some German sword things are involved, but it was really cool.
Okay.
That's all I have to say.
No spoilers for
I haven't seen
that yet, though, because I haven't had a chance to watch the new episodes. I got the first couple, but I can't wait.
There's lightsabers and they fight, and it's swords, sort of, and it's probably related, and it was really cool. You'll enjoy it.
Oh yeah, I've heard little bits, but I started reading some article and I was like, oh no, and I like closed the page, like panicked, like no spoilers.
On a side note, if anyone, when anyone gets the chance to, you should watch some of the Robert the Bruce movie that just came out. That's really good. Just
cool.
a side note.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'm not 100% on this, but I am fairly certain Michael Bergstrom, who is or at least was a Tila Harfectula member back in the Alaska chapter, was involved in production. He's in a lot of television production and does camera work and producing and directing and things like that. He's done some commercials, and I believe he wasn't high up in that project, but I believe Bergstrom was involved with something with that because he was posting some behind the scenes thing like 2 years ago. But I think it was that way. It might have. I'm not 100%. It might have been a different project, but I believe he was saying. I thought he said it was the Robert the Bruce movie. So there actually, if I'm correct, then there was actually a guy that did HEMA that was involved in the production of that. So big bonus points for that movie.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Nice.
Okay, so I'm going to read through the next section here because this all kind of runs together, and we're getting towards the end of this. So just a quick side note before we continue this. We're going to continue the material we've been going over and up to the first of the master cuts, the Stroke of Wrath or Zornhau. Next week, we're going to pick up with the Zornhau, and we will read the text on that, and we'll look at von Danzig and some of the other masters and what their commentaries are. I'll remind you again at the end of this, but over the week, if you want, if you have a training partner, film yourself with a training partner practicing your Zornhau. If you don't have a training partner and you just have a cell phone, feel free to just practice it on a Pell or in the air or whatever. That way you can share in our Zoom, and towards the end of class, we can actually all demonstrate our cuts, and then we can all kind of give each other some feedback on that. Sound good? That'll be your homework, is read about the Zornhau and then film yourself doing the Zornhau. So, but let's get back to this so we can finish up for tonight. Here, note what is called the before. So von Danzig goes in and kind of gives some more definition to some of the terminology that he was using in that last section. What is called the before. This means that you should always get there before he does, whether with a stroke or thrust. And when you come first with the stroke or other technique, so that he must parry you, then instantly work nimbly at the parrying before you with your at the parrying before you with your sword, or else with other techniques. Thus he cannot he come not to work. Thus he can come not to work. Weird translation, sorry. Here note what is called the after. The after is the counter technique to all other techniques and strokes that an opponent uses against you. And understand it thus. When he gets there before you with a stroke, so that you must parry it, then work instantly from the parrying nimbly with your sword to the next opening. Thus you break his before with your after. So this is, before I continue on, quick note, he makes a point right here of saying, hey, fight in the before, it's so much better. But then he says, break your opponent's before with your after. So he already is starting to give some counters and things here. Here note the weak and strong of the sword. Understand that the weak, spec, and strong start of the sword thus. From the hilt to the middle of the blade is the strong of the sword. So the lower half of the sword, closer to the hand, is the strong. And then from the middle of the blade to the point is the weak. So the further out on the blade you get is the weak. And how you should work with the strong of your sword to the weak of his sword, you will find explained afterwards. So I think that's a pretty straightforward explanation of some of the terminology that was being used already, right?
I'm sorry, what page are you reading that off of?
This is page 112.
Oh, 112. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So he just goes into in the previous section you talked a little bit about before and after the Vornach, and then he goes into a little bit more specifics about what the Vornach are and how they are kind of the opposite forces to each other. But interesting thing to note is that in his description of the before and the after, the vor and the nach, he talks about, regardless of whether you're acting in the vor or the nach yourself, once the bind happens, he makes a point of saying that you're going to respond indes or during. So even if your opponent does take that first cut at you and you are simply responding, once you've responded in the nach, you will respond instantly to figure out what sort of counter action you need to do. And then when he talks a little bit about the strong and the weak of the sword, he is talking about making use of putting the strong of your sword on the weak of his. Question for everybody out there: what is the #1 German technique that involves using the strong of your sword against the weak of your opponents?
Zorn.
We do it all the time.
Winding? Pretty sure.
Yes, the winding. I don't know who said it.
Trevor did. Good
But
job.
it's the one. Yay, go Trevor!
I knew
Bonus points.
something. Oh, you
Hi.
too. That's more impressive.
I literally just got
So
here.
for those, if you don't know, the winding action is that going from extended out here, as if you were throwing that cut, turning the blade up into the guard ox, the high guard. That action there, going from this lower position to the high position, is the one. And with an opponent's blade, it naturally takes their blade and drives the weak of their sword out towards the cross guard of your sword, which gives you immense power over their blade. It's hard to feel solo without somebody else giving you pressure there. But anyone that's done this with an opponent, going from an even bind, both of you simply cutting from above, crossing the swords in the middle, while one of you turns into the high guard, you'll feel the other person's strength completely disappear as you move up.
Cool.
Where was I? Oh, I think I didn't read this part from the other section before, but this is kind of the end. The next section here, we went over a lot of the basic fundamental stuff. We talked about essentially some of the concepts of timing. We talked about stepping with the appropriate foot coming into things. We've talked in this first section about some of the really basic principles. The next little bit is actually a sort of an introduction into the master cuts and the follow-on technique. So the beginning of this text is telling us essentially a lot about how to go from the Zufechten, that just out of range of the fight, to in range. The master cuts are the 5 master cuts are really the optimized version of how to go from Zufechten into range, into contact with your opponent under the best circumstances that you have the most control over. And then the section in Liechtenauer's verse after that actually goes over essentially all the techniques that are what to do once you are in that bind. Once you've crossed swords, you're both in range. What to do there. So there is some very big picture reasoning the way that the curriculum is laid out this way. Liechtenauer starts off by telling us that, okay, here's how we step in. Now here's the best way to step in. Now here's what to do once you have stepped. Make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to read through this. This is the text of the 5 strokes and the gloss. 5 strokes, here's Liechtenauer's verse. 5 strokes learned from the right side against the opposition. Thus, then we promise that your art will be rewarded. And then Von Danzig goes to comment, note, these are the 5 secret strokes that many masters of the sword know nothing about. So we know them, but a lot of other people would not. You should learn to strike them correctly from the right side. The combatant who can break these strokes with true skill without coming into harm is commended by the other masters and shall be praised in his art more than another combatant. And how one should strike these strokes with the techniques you will find described hereafter. So he's really putting the importance on what these techniques are going to be. Next, here's a little bit from Liechtenauer again. Wrath stroke, crooked, thwart, splinter, and scalper. Fool parries, chasing, overrunning, give stroke, change through, pull, run through, slice off, press the hands, hang, wind to the openings, strike, catch, slash, thrust with jabs. So that's a lot of stuff right there. But if you look at that, those are all the techniques that we do, working initially from the master cuts, and then change through, pull, run through, slice off. These are all the techniques we do once we bind. Liechtenauer tells us these just in this poem, again, because calling back to what we learned about in the beginning of this, he wasn't meaning that you would learn the techniques by just saying, press the hands. He put these into this poem here, the Zettel, in order to let people that he had already taught remember these things. So you would do the lesson, you would learn from him, he would teach his students, and then you'd teach them this poem, not so that they could write it down and have every note of every class ever. This was just the crib notes. The Zettel itself, which is kind of the point of some of this this lecture series, is a series of excuse me, it's crib notes for fighting arts. And then, of course, commentaries by these various masters are what kind of flesh out the system for us as practitioners in the modern era to actually understand what's going on. So after this section here with the listing of all these techniques, Von Danzig writes, note, here are named the true chief techniques, or Hauptstücke, of the epitome longsword, how each one is named, so that you can better recognize and understand them. First are the 5 strokes and how each of them is named. The first is the Zornhau, or stroke of wrath. The second is the Krumphau, or crooked stroke. The third is the Zwerchhau, or thwarting stroke. The fourth is the Schielhau, or squinting stroke. And the fifth is the Scheitelhau, or scalp stroke. Everyone that's been coming to class regularly for a while should understand all those. And just to finish this up, now note the technique item. The first is the Weerhutten, the 4 guards. The second are the Weerversetzen, the 4 oppositions, which we can get into. I have some videos on YouTube about that. The first is the Nachreisen, the chasing after, nach being the key word there. The fourth is Überlaufen, overrunning. The fifth is Absetzen, or setting off. The sixth is Durchwechseln, changing through. Wechseln, like the term we had used earlier in the beginning of the verse. The seventh is the Zucken, or pulling, which is the technique that I love and Luke hates.
Very true.
The eighth is Laufen, or running through. The ninth is the Abschneiden, or slicing off. The 10th is the Handdrücken, or pressing on the hands. The 11th is the Hängen, or hanging. That one's a pretty easy cognate. And the 12th is the Winden, or winding. And how you shall fight from the technique and how you will make yourself open with the hangings and the windings, you will find described in order in what follows next. So, end of this section here is basically just a little preview of all the stuff that is going to go on next. Again, everyone that's been coming to class and training with us regularly or following the YouTube channel, videos, things like that, a lot of these terms should be at least somewhat familiar. And I don't expect you, if you're especially a newer student, to just remember if I say Durchwechseln exactly what that is. If you're one of the senior students, Katie, Luke, Rob, any of you that have been multiple years, and I say something like this, I expect you to remember what a Zucken means. So I don't think there's much explaining to do for this section. I think it's just, here's a list of techniques. Interesting thing that I think is note is he talks about the first section of this is our 5 master cuts, followed by talking about the 4 guards, and then the 4 oppositions, the Veer Versetzen. Now, the Veer Versetzen, spoiler alert, this is something that'll come up later on in this series, but the Veer Versetzen is the idea of using, say, the Krumpau against the Ox, the Zwerchau against the Vantag, the Schielhau Squinting Stroke against Flug, and the Scalp Stroke, the Scheitelhau against Oliver. So, in terms of Liechtenauer and von Danzig, some of these masters and their ordering of things, he tells us what the master cuts are. Then he tells us what the guards are. Then he tells us that we can counter those guards with those master cuts. It's just an interesting thing for me, just on the nerdy side of these manuscripts. So next week, we're going to continue on, and we're going to start off with the Zornhau section here. And as the preview, the first line of that is, "He who strikes at you above the wrath stroke threatens him with the point." So that is one of my favorite techniques. If I'm giving a seminar somewhere where we only have an hour or so or 90 minutes of class time, and I'm just giving a very quick presentation on these things, then I'm going to use the something like just the Zornhau and some of the follow-on techniques from there as that fundamental teaching someone that maybe hasn't done longsword before the basics of what German longsword really is. So next week we're going to look at that in depth. Like I said, go over the material yourself. The link, I'll put up an updated link about the Zornhau explicitly for those that are looking for it that don't have the text. If you're looking in the text and you want to read it, it is on page 113, starting at first of the wrath stroke. So that's the section you're going to be looking at. Read through the material. If you can, take video or pictures of yourself practicing it. Let's share it in the group setting here so that we can all kind of look at what our interpretations are. And the same thing is this week, we'll look at what the text says and kind of go through what our interpretations and our experiences are with that. Anybody have any questions on what we went over tonight?
Give me some time.
Everybody is always welcome to either message us on Facebook, social media, Instagram, whatever. I do my best to respond to those kinds of things. Facebook message. Mm-hmm.
I had a question about donation. I wanted to give you guys a couple of bucks for today's class. How would I go about doing that if I wanted to throw you guys?
Easiest way is PayPal.
Okay.
How much of a donation would you like, Chris?
That is entirely up to you.
Okay.
Class is normally $10, but this isn't a full class. This is like an online thing, so I'm not sure what people. And like I said, I know I don't want to say you must pay this for class like we would normally, because one, I mean, I made a Zoom account, so like a professional Zoom account, so we're paying for that. That's not too much, but it's not like regular class when like regular class I have to pay our insurance, which actually I will still have to pay insurance eventually, but we have our insurance, we have our hall fee that our normal class dues go to, but this we don't have class dues. But if you want to make a donation, I just put info@laurelcitystore.com. That'll be that's my PayPal for that. But like I said, if people are strapped for cash right now, I understand. Don't worry about it. Don't stress about it. I know some people are doing just fine. I know some people are struggling. I know some people are out of work. The world is a mess right now. So, if you want to, feel free, but don't feel forced, okay? Okay, any other questions then?
E-transfer? You do e-transfer?
That again?
Maybe. What's e-transfer? Is it
Oh, no.
Canadian PayPal?
Well, it's just through bank, so using your email as a secure money transfer. So yeah, it's using your email as well, but it's through your bank. So it's from my bank to
Okay,
your bank, basically. So
I don't think I have that set up with my bank. Actually, now that you say that, my bank just got bought out by I had a little local bank for many years, and it just got bought out by one of those big national type banks.
Okay.
And I saw something about just that in some, information packet that I got, but I haven't actually played with that yet. So I have to look at that. I'll figure that out eventually.
Chris,
I'm old. Yes. Who?
we have the same bank. It will do it.
Yeah, but I think I have to set it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, to set it up or something.
Cool.
I will. Sarah, what did your daughter yell at me for today? Just to understand how old I am compared to people nowadays.
I don't know.
What did she yell at? What was she playing with? Yeah. I called her Nintendo DS a
Game Boy.
Game Boy, and she took that as a because it's a Game Boy.
That's not old. That's a Game Boy.
She came home. She woke up. She passed out in the car because Amelia has this insane ability to get sick driving the car, so we have to drug her.
Oh, no.
So she fell asleep on the way back. She woke up to tell me that she had fallen asleep, and then she fell asleep again. So she got out of the car and she's like, I'm going to take my DS and tell Chris it's not a Game Boy, and I won't tolerate him calling that again. I'm like, aw, hey, little mother. She was pretty mad.
Yeah.
I guess it's like the equivalent of calling a karambit a sword. It's like, it's not just a sword.
She was very mad.
Yeah.
Okay, as we're slowly getting off topic here, any other comments about, or comments or questions or anything about the class tonight? About the material, upcoming, anything like that?
What page are we reading up to on the Zornhow?
Oh, that is a good question. Thank you, Jack. If you're looking at St. George's name, it was page 113. The Zornhow section goes until, we will be looking at it 113 through 116.
16. Okay.
Pages 113 to 116. Up till on 116 where it says this is the text and gloss of the Crunk House. Basically, just as again a little preview, we go over the Zornhow, which is our first of the secret strokes or master cuts, and then it talks a little bit about some of the different things like what the four openings are, duplier and multier, which are some of the countering techniques, and what else is in here? Something else. I think there's something about winding. There's a bunch of the basic of, if you've come into this with our first cut, here are some options of what to do if your opponent is countered. So next week we're going to be looking at all that material.
Chris, Ronan had a question in.
Yes, I believe there is actually, if I don't know, actually I don't know if it's specifically PDF, but I believe there's a digital download. Let me look that up quick.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. This is fascinating, isn't it? Like just me. Yeah, there is a Kindle version here. I will copy, and where's my chat? There is a link to In St. George's Name if you want the ebook version. And anyone that's interested, copy link location, and this is another good one. this is the second link there is fighting with the German longsword, which is where a lot of our basic curriculum comes from. It doesn't have it's not like this text is the transcription translation of a specific manual. Fighting with the German longsword is kind of all of them put together. There's some quotes derived from some of the other manuscripts and things, but it's not teaching. It's teaching them in more of a modern mindset and not as much in a let's look at this from entirely historical. In that one, I will say, in fighting with the German longsword, the photographs are much better because I had a better camera, and
Nice.
I also will say that I got where share a slightly heavier and a much shorter haired and heavier set version of me was got to be in the book. So
Nice. Awesome.
but I think that wraps up everything for class-wise tonight, right?
All right, guys. I will see you next week. I actually have to sign off because my niece is sleeping in the room that I'm sitting in right now. So I have to start wrapping it up soon anyway. So I'll see you guys next week.
Bye, Jack.
Yes, thank you.
Bye, Jack.
Thank you all for coming. Don't forget your homework. Let me know if you have any difficulties.
Don't forget the homework.
All right. Sounds good. Bye, guys.
Good night.
Good night.